This is Viewpoint, a program presented in the public interest by WHO Television. Your host, WHO TV News Director, Phil Thomas.
Hello again. We're very pleased to have with us today on Viewpoint Captain GERALD GNECKOW, who is the commander of the USS Iowa, the battleship that's being refitted down in Mississippi right now. Captain GNECKOW was born in Grand Island, Nebraska, and he graduated from high school in Boise, Idaho, and came out of Naval ROTC at the University of Idaho. And we're pleased to have him with us today on the program. Captain GNECKOW, a lot of families are in this situation this spring. It's graduation time, and back in 1960, when you were graduating from the University of Idaho, finishing Naval ROTC, going into the Navy as an ensign, did you ever dream at that time that someday you might command a battleship?
Well, actually, I never did. As a matter of fact, I think I would have to say that I really had not intended to make the Navy my career. I graduated from my Navy ROTC, as you said, and I had a 3-year obligation to serve. And my intention was to serve my 3-year obligation and then become a school teacher.
Well, how'd you get interested in staying in there then?
Well, my first tour was in Hawaii, Pearl Harbor, and I enjoyed the ship and my Navy experience so much that I decided to stay on for another tour. One thing led to another, and here I am.
Well, you've been doing teaching in the Navy, War College, and you've commanded destroyers. How do you get to be commander of the battleship Iowa? Is it something that officers in the Navy pursue, or how does that come about?
Well, I'm sure that many of them will be pursuing it now, but as you know, we haven't had battleships in commission very often, at least during the time that I've been in the Navy. So I would say it would not have been an aspiration of most of the officers that I've served with. But there's an aura, a mystique around the battleship, and most of the surface warfare officers today, I'm sure, would be very pleased to command a battleship.
This is going to be, I would think, a long process to refit this ship. It took, about 3.5 years to build it originally, and how long will it take to refit a battleship that's been out of service since 1958 and that was built 40 years ago?
Well, actually, it's going to be done in about 18 months, which is a very short period of time as compared to what it takes to build a ship from the keel up. And that's one of the tremendous advantages of the battleship, is that we're able to get it in service quickly. And we need the battleship now.
Well, we have some videotape to show people. It's a little hard to imagine the size of a battleship, about 3.5 city blocks long, I guess. And so we want to show the people some pictures of it, and the Navy's provided us with a report. The refitting of the battleship is going on down in Mississippi, and this progress report was made for internal use by the Navy and was put together by a Navy journalist.
Reactivation and modernization of the battleship Iowa is currently underway at the Ingalls Shipbuilding Division in Pascagoula, Mississippi.
Well, the ship arrived here on the 30th of January this year, which was actually a day earlier than scheduled. She had been at Avondale Shipyards in New Orleans for the dry docking phase. And when the ship got here, we continued that work. One is rip out, and then the open and inspect phase. The open and inspect is where we open up the machinery to determine what work has to be done on that machinery.
Many changes have already occurred. The ship's 10 5-inch mounts were removed in Philadelphia. 6 will be reinstalled. The entire ship's electrical system is being checked. Wiring found unsuitable will be replaced. Down the ship's center line in Engineering's Broadway, the 8 boilers are being refurbished and tested to determine their condition. Modifications are underway. The old flag officers' mess is being reinforced with additional armor to become the combat engagement center. There will be new additions. A new sewage collection system has to be installed, and air conditioning will be added to the Iowa for the first time. This open and inspection phase will continue for the next several months. The Iowa is scheduled to join the fleet in mid-1984. For Navy Video News, I'm journalist Rick Walsh.
Captain Gneckow, you've been around a lot of Navy ships. What kind of condition is the Iowa in compared to other ships that you've seen in the fleet after all these years?
Well, she's actually in very good condition. As you know, when the Navy puts a ship in mothballs, we control the temperature and the humidity in the ship very closely and seal it up so that the ship really doesn't deteriorate. And we also have a system of what we call cathodic protection, which protects the underwater body so that the propellers and the shafts don't deteriorate either. My first view of the ship was some 6 months ago, and I found it to be in incredibly good condition.
How many battleships are there in the world's navies these days?
Well, right now there's only one, the USS New Jersey, which is active in the United States Navy.
Do other countries have battleships in mothballs?
I'm sure that they do. I'm not aware of it.
Well, this is somewhat unique then around the world to bring a battleship back into the fleet in peacetime, then, I would think.
It is.
How much modernization will have to be done? It's steam-powered, isn't it?
It is steam-powered. Of course, most of our ships in the United States Navy today are steam-powered. Some gas turbine, some nuclear, but steam plants are very familiar to the sailors of today's Navy, and we're very well equipped to operate this ship. It has what we call a 600-pound steam plant, familiar to many of our sailors, and we foresee no problem in getting the ship underway and steaming 30-plus knots.
How many of the Navy ships are air-conditioned? They talked about putting air conditioning in this one.
Most of the new ships are air-conditioned, and this is it's a requirement because of new electronics equipment. Just requires a cooler environment than the old vacuum tube type of electronics equipment.
And they talked about, when the Iowa was built, they bragged about the electrical generating capacity. I imagine things have changed considerably since that was designed, too, haven't they?
Well, they have, but the generators on the Iowa are still very serviceable and will provide us with 20 to 25 years of additional life.
Well, the Iowa-class battleship, I think that, wasn't that about 1939 they began that program, and they built how many of those?
There were 6 planned, 4 were actually completed, and all 4 are still around today. 2 in mothballs, one on the East Coast and one on the West Coast, USS Wisconsin and USS Missouri. And then, of course, the New Jersey, which is active today, and the Iowa, which is undergoing reactivation.
The Iowa was christened in 1943, I believe, by Mrs. Henry A. Wallace of Des Moines, who was wife of the Vice President. Are there any plans for any recommissioning ceremonies involving any Iowans that you know of when this goes back into service?
Well, of course, we're planning the recommissioning for summer of '84, and right now I'm hoping for the date 4 July, which would be a good patriotic day to put Iowa back in commission. And I think that the ship will be ready to be commissioned at that point. We haven't firmed up any plans for who the speakers might be or who would be present this time.
Well, we have some videotape that presents the historical perspective on the battleship, some of the more interesting things about it. A little over a year ago, a reporter for WHO-TV, George Mills, had a series of reports on the evening news about the reactivation of the battleship Iowa, and some of the reports covered the history of battleships named after the state of Iowa, and we've pulled one of those reports out of the archives to show you today on this program.
Iowans have always been proud of warships named for their state. The 4th Iowa and her sister ships are the biggest ever in the American fleet. The Iowa is returning to service after 25 years in retirement. It was nearly badly damaged or sunk with President Franklin Roosevelt aboard in 1943. He was being taken across the Atlantic when an American destroyer on maneuvers mistakenly fired a torpedo that the Iowa barely evaded. Because of Roosevelt, the Iowa has the only bathtub aboard a U.S. warship.
As you well know, the president was a polio victim and took a frequent number of sitz baths, and so therefore it was installed for that trip on the Iowa. It's unique to find any bathtub on a combatant.
The first Iowa was a wooden ship in the 1800s. The third was partly built when it was purposely destroyed in 1923 under a disarmament treaty that did not bring peace. The second Iowa, shown here, was prominent in the Spanish-American War and fired the first shot in the Battle of Santiago Bay in 1898. The state of Iowa spent $5,000 in 1897 for the now priceless silver service, which was used on both number 2 and number 4 and is now on display in the State Historical Building. Will the service be returned again to the Iowa?
Well, I think that we would acquiesce to it because that's the purpose of the Silver Service, is to properly show the pride of Iowans in the battleship, and we'd put it back.
State officials had hoped to get a turret of the guns 68 feet long for display on the State House grounds. But the guns are being retained for possible use in a shooting war everyone hopes will never happen. How commonplace things become. Here is the bronze headpiece of the second Iowa of the Spanish-American War. Few, if any, ever pay any attention to it. Military glory is here today and gone tomorrow. George Mills, New Center 13.
So what happens to the bathtub? Does that stay on the battleship Iowa?
The bathtub will stay.
Is that right?
Yes.
And how about the 16-inch guns? In this same series, we had a writer with Jane's Fighting Ships talking about 16-inch guns striking terror into the heart of the enemy in past battles. How viable is the 16-inch gun as a weapon in today's world?
Well, it still has a great deal of utility. The battleship would probably be the central instrument or the central unit in an amphibious assault of any sort. And in that context, the 16-inch gun, of course, would be a welcome addition to Army or Marine Corps. The 16-inch gun has a range of 23 miles. The projectile weighs 2,700 pounds. One armor-piercing projectile can penetrate 30 feet of concrete. One high-capacity projectile will destroy everything in a dense jungle out to a 200-foot diameter. So you could make an instant landing zone for helicopters with one shot.
Is it safe to fire those guns after 40 years?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Those guns are in terrific condition. We just checked the wear, for instance, on the barrels last week and found that the Iowa barrels are only 7% expended.
How about today's explosives that they may, I imagine a more modern type of charge is used in those.
We'll still be using the same projectiles that were built in World War II.
Still got them left?
We have plenty of them left.
Plenty of them in stock, huh? Well, it'll carry, it's being refitted with more modern weapons too, right? Missiles?
Yes.
What kind of missiles will it be on the Iowa?
The primary weapon will be the cruise missile Tomahawk.
Uh-huh.
And we will carry 32 of those Tomahawk cruise missiles. They have several different functions. One would be in an anti-ship role. In that role, the cruise missile has a range of about 250 miles. In a land attack role, it has a range of somewhere near 1,000 miles. And of course, as you know, the Soviet Navy has a number of ships at sea that have cruise missiles or surface-to-surface missiles with ranges of that nature, about 200 plus miles.
Isn't there a harpoon?
There's also a harpoon missile, which the Navy uses extensively right now, surface-to-surface, with a range of about 60 miles.
And what's that role of that weapon?
That'll be anti-ship also.
Now, it would seem that the Iowa is going to be a missile platform, and that maybe its role is as a mobile missile platform, and the United States wouldn't have to deal with the political climate in countries for basing nuclear weapons if it has a missile platform at sea that can be moved around and stationed wherever it seems to be necessary at the time.
Well, I don't think that in the near
Is that a fair observation?
Maybe. I don't think that in the near future that the surface-to-surface missiles that we're going to carry on the battleship are going to fulfill the role that you're talking about
They
here.
don't have that great of range, then?
Well, they have a long range, but we're talking about a relatively small number, 32, on the battleship. And of course, the primary function that we foresee would be in an anti-ship role.
It's traditional
Yes.
role in the fleet then. Well, ships have been controversial, as you know, in the last 15 years, well, 16 years or so, because of the sinking of 2 destroyers by missiles, an Israeli destroyer in 1967 by an Egyptian-Russian built missile, and the sinking of the Sheffield last year in the Falkland Islands. What do you think about those? You've commanded destroyers. Is it a lack of anti-missile defense, or are all ships vulnerable to that kind of an attack?
Well, of course, no ship is invulnerable to either that kind of an attack or other types of attack. But the battleship has several unique characteristics that will aid in that kind of a problem. I think you also need to preface this by saying that the United States Navy doesn't operate in exactly the same type of scenario that we viewed in the Falklands. For instance, we do have aircraft carriers. The aircraft carriers have aboard aircraft that are capable of very long-range detection against low-flying aircraft and missiles. And we would expect to get much more warning than what was gotten in the Falklands situation. We would have F-14 aircraft, other types of aircraft out for long-range defense. And then for close-range defense, we have a number of new weapon systems that were not available in the Falklands, such as the close-in weapon system, which there will be 4 of on the Iowa. And it is, in essence, a Gatling gun. It fires 20-millimeter projectiles, which are depleted uranium, very heavy metal, at a rate of 3,000 rounds per minute. And that will be one of our primary defenses. There are also electronic measures for defense. We have decoys and deception devices that will be integral to the Iowa defense. And so we're certainly not invulnerable, but the Iowa has tremendous defense, and should it be hit, it is extremely survivable. We're talking about a ship now that has up to 17.5 inches of armor in many places. The hull itself has over 12 inches of armor. So this is a ship that can take a lot of punishment.
Well, as you know, I think it was in the South Pacific, a Japanese shell hit the Iowa and bounced off the thing in World War II. What will be the impact of a missile? Would it be the impact of a missile on that armor plate? Would it?
Well, of course, the armor plate on the ship is actually inside the double sides. So I suspect that if a missile were to impact on the side of the Iowa, that it would penetrate a couple of voids, do very little damage, and strike the armor side, and that would be the end of it.
Will it have the same speed at sea? I noticed the speed's been reported as about the equivalent of 35 miles an hour or 38 miles an hour, somewhere in there. Will it have the same speed or faster speed? Or?
Well, we anticipate that the ship will go 30-plus knots, probably up to about 33. The propulsion plan is the same, and we expect to get maximum efficiency from it.
Now, because of its size, that somewhat restricts where it goes. For instance, it won't go through the Panama Canal.
It can.
It can?
It was the Iowa.
Right?
Yes, the Iowa class battleship was specifically built to dimensions that would allow it to go through the canal. And I was on the USS Wisconsin when it went through the Panama Canal in 1957.
So they can get through, huh?
Oh, yes.
Oh.
The ship is exactly 108 feet wide, and the canal is something like 110. So it was designed to go through.
Will it be based in the Atlantic, or do you know?
It will be. The Iowa will be an East Coast ship. Right now, the home port has not been defined. The Navy will make an announcement about home port probably next month.
Well, in World War II and in the 50s, it carried a crew of about 2,000 men. What kind of staffing do you expect on the recommissioned Iowa?
We'll have just a little less than 1,500 enlisted and about 65 officers.
How about women? Will women serve on the Iowa
Oh,
this
no.
time? They won't? Okay.
No.
All right. Still haven't accomplished that. Huh? Isn't it unusual that a career naval officer who's not a Naval Academy graduate gets a battleship command, or is that unusual?
Well, I guess there isn't any precedent for this, at least not a recent one. I think that the opportunities for career for any officer joining the Navy at this time, whether he come to us through OCS, Navy ROTC, or the Naval Academy, are about the same, purely based upon results and record.
Mm-hmm. Well, you have 4 children, 3 boys and a girl, and you told me one of your boys is interested in the Navy.
Yes, I have one son who is in law school, and he's applied to the Navy JAG Corps, the Judge Advocate General, which is our lawyer branch.
Well, how would you advise young people who are interested in careers in the Navy to pursue it? Should they go about it through college, or what would you say?
I certainly would,
Mm-hmm.
if that opportunity was available, and there are a number of ways that a young person can get his college tuition, books, and salary paid. One is through the Navy ROTC program. And of course, today I was, as a matter of fact, just over to Hoover High School, where I gave away, or awarded, a couple of appointments to the Naval Academy and one Navy ROTC scholarship to a young man over there at Hoover.
So you had three recruits right there then?
That's right.
All right. Well, you know, on some of our old tape of the battleship Iowa that we showed today, very much in evidence is the teak wood deck. Will it have that, or do we have AstroTurf?
No, we don't have AstroTurf. The ship still has its teak decks. Some of the teak has deteriorated, and I'm sure some more of it will be deteriorated before reactivation is complete. We have the teak decks covered with plywood right now to protect them, but we're obviously going to have to remove some of that teak. It's going to be replaced with fir, which looks very similar, and will do the job.
Is it, you can't get teak wood these days? Or
Well,
is it
it's
not,
pretty expensive.
It's pretty expensive, huh? Okay. How much chance do you think an Iowan would have enlisting in the Navy serving on the Iowa? Is that...
You'd have a great chance. As a matter of fact, we just got through recently asking for people to return to the Navy. Fleet reserves, which are people who have served 20 years and then went to the reserve force, or retired people, those are people who have served 30 or more, and selected reserves, those are people who are in the reserve category now. We've asked them if they would be interested in becoming active in order to serve on the Iowa, and we had something like 4,000 applications as a result of that request. Of those 4,000 applications, some 3,200 or so have been screened, and we have already picked about 165 people from the reserve force who will be on the Iowa. At least 2 of them that I know of are Iowans.
Is there any chance of a reunion of people who served on the USS Iowa?
There's going to be one next month in Denver. Ex-USS Iowa sailors have a reunion every year. This year it's in Denver on the 24th, 25th, and 26th of June. I intend to be there with several of our new crew members.
What's it like to serve on, what's it going to be like to serve on the battleship Iowa? How long will they be out? What would day-to-day life on a battleship be like?
Well, I think it's going to be pretty exciting. Obviously, the ship will draw a great amount of recognition, and those who serve aboard will be doing something unique. We'll probably be going to places and visiting countries that other ships don't have an opportunity to visit. We'll do our fair share, I think, of politicking and showing the flag.
Won't you have to deal with some local politics if you're carrying nuclear warheads? Might you run into trouble here and there? Or
well, of course, you know that the Navy never confirms nor denies the presence of nuclear weapons on any of our ships. We will only say that the Iowa will be a nuclear-capable ship, and no one except those aboard will actually know whether or not nuclear weapons are present.
But even nuclear-powered subs have had trouble from time to time, you know, docking in Japan with
But we have many ships in the Navy today that are what we call nuclear capable, that have absolutely no problem in port visits.
Well, how long would the battleship be out to sea before it would make port longest, you imagine?
Well, that's kind of hard to say.
Okay.
Right now, we have a proposed schedule for the next year, and it looks like the longest period of time that it's planned for us to be out at one stretch is about 20 days.
What's it like to ride out a storm in the battleship, or is weather forecasting and your electronics sophisticated enough that you can get away from them more than you used to? What would you say?
I don't think you can necessarily get away from them. We will have an aerographer, a meteorological unit on board, and a lot of new sophisticated equipment that allows us to get satellite information about the weather, which helps a lot. It helps you get away from the worst part of the storm. But of course, the battleship is extremely tough and sturdy, and it can ride out a very heavy storm.
Well, they, of course, aren't made for comfort. Is there anything besides air conditioning that's going into the refitting of the Iowa that might be different?
Well, this ship, of course, will have a super closed-circuit TV system that will allow the crew an opportunity to view television, movies, and whatnot. We'll have a soda fountain and movies in the mess decks. The traditional things that the Navy does to try and make life a little happier for the sailor.
Has life aboard ship improved in the time you've been in the Navy?
Yeah, it sure has. It sure has.
Yeah. Aboard ship and otherwise. Huh?
My first two ships, as I recall, were not air-conditioned. And living on board a non-air conditioned ship is a tough way to go.
How does your family adjust to that? How do you be a parent when you're...
Well, you have to have a good Navy wife who is very independent and is willing to be both mother and father while you're gone. And most people who are successful in the military career do have a good wife who's willing to take all those burdens while her husband's gone.
Do they live in communities and share the same concerns and obligations and kind of support each other, would you say?
Well, some do. Some live on military bases where everyone in the neighborhood has the same problems. Some live out in the community with the civilians, and we find that works very well.
When do you think the USS Iowa will begin sea tests?
We'll probably go out on our first sea trial in April of 1984.
So a little over a year from now, then, huh?
Right.
And how long before it goes on regular station?
Well, we're scheduled to depart Pascagoula, Mississippi, where the ship is now, mid-July 1984. And then we'll go through refresher training and shakedown and test out all of our equipment, and then move to our new home port.
We'll be watching for that, and thanks for being with us today.
It was my pleasure.
Captain Gerald Gneckow, the commander of the battleship Iowa, which is being refitted in Mississippi. Thank you for being with us, and we'll see you again next time with another Viewpoint.
Viewpoint is a public affairs program presented as a public service by WHO-TV Des Moines.